Hi guys, sorry to interrupt your viewing, but please subscribe to the channel and like this video. Thank you.
The gate area buzzed with the chaotic hum of 100 tired travelers, each one either jostling for a better place in line or pretending they were too refined to care, and somewhere in the middle of all that, my family staged another one of our familiar little dramas. Jessica, my younger sister by just 2 years, but somehow always treated like the family's precious miracle, had gotten to the seating area before me and was now sprawling herself across 2 chairs, her carry-on tossed carelessly onto the third, blocking my reserved seat without even a flicker of shame on her heavily lip-glossed face. "First come, first served, loser," she sang out, her voice slicing through the gate's thick air like a knife through a cheap plastic birthday cake, loud enough that a few people nearby looked up from their phones to witness my humiliation. My parents, Karen and Bob, who sat only a few feet away pretending to read old magazines, barely glanced up before exchanging that familiar look, the one that said, "Let it go, Amanda, it is not worth the trouble." I stood there, hands clenched into awkward fists, heart hammering inside my chest, not from the minor inconvenience of losing a seat, but from the heavy, familiar sting of knowing that once again, my place in this family was negotiable at best and disposable at worst. I opened my mouth to protest, even managing a shaky, "Hey, that's my seat, I was here first," but Mom just sighed loudly, as if I was the one creating a scene, and Dad muttered something along the lines of, "Can't you just sit somewhere else? It's not a big deal." Jessica shot me a smirk so triumphant it made my stomach twist in on itself, like one of those sad little balloon animals abandoned at a fairground after the crowds had gone home. I looked around for another seat, spotting only a single empty one near the trash cans, which seemed like the perfect metaphor for how my family always seemed to treat me, useful only when convenient and discarded when someone more entertaining came along. I sat down, arms folded, seething silently while Jessica pulled out her phone and started snapping selfies, no doubt captioning them with something equally obnoxious. She had always been good at that, turning small, petty victories into full-blown Broadway performances, and the audience, our parents, applauded every single time. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, noting the smug tilt of her head, the way she flipped her hair like she was starring in her own reality show, and for the first time in a long while, I felt something inside me stir that was more than hurt, something sharper, more dangerous. The boarding announcement crackled overhead, jolting me out of my dark thoughts. Zone 3. That was us. Jessica grabbed her designer tote and marched toward the line without even glancing back, as if it were a foregone conclusion that the world would part before her like the Red Sea before Moses. Mom and Dad rose more slowly, exchanging a few tired words about whose turn it was to deal with the hotel check-in once we landed, neither of them sparing a second thought for the daughter trailing several steps behind, who was beginning to realize that maybe, just maybe, this vacation was not going to go the way they all expected. I adjusted my backpack, feeling the worn straps bite into my shoulders, and followed them to the line, feeling the heat rise behind my eyes, not from sadness this time, but from a slow, burning rage that had been marinating inside me for far too many years. I remembered all the other small slights, the forgotten birthdays, the missed school plays, the way Jessica's minor achievements were celebrated like Nobel Prizes, while my own accomplishments barely earned a nod. I remembered it all, and for once, instead of swallowing it down like a good little daughter, I let it sit there, heavy and festering, a wound I was no longer willing to pretend was healing. As we inched closer to the boarding agent, Jessica turned and grinned at me over her shoulder, that same infuriating grin that had been her weapon of choice since we were kids, and I swear to God something inside me snapped. I plastered on a tight, fake smile of my own, nodded slightly as if to say, "Sure, you win again," and I felt something shift in the air around me, a silent promise to myself that this time, things would be different. This time, I would not just take the punch and smile. This time, I would hit back in a way she would never see coming. When the agent scanned our boarding passes, Jessica practically skipped onto the jet bridge, basking in the imaginary applause of her invisible fans, while Mom and Dad followed with the resigned, weary air of people who had long accepted that their vacation would revolve around their favorite child's whims. I hung back for a second, adjusting my carry-on, trying to steady my heartbeat, trying to quiet the noise in my head that was screaming at me not to let this go. Not this time, not again. As I stepped forward and handed over my ticket, the gate agent gave me a brief glance, then nodded, too distracted by the commotion of the late passengers scrambling to get on board to notice the war I was carrying in my chest. I made my way down the jet bridge slowly, already crafting the beginning of a plan in my mind, feeling the sharp edges of anger slice away the last remnants of the guilt and self-doubt that had kept me small for so long. Little did Jessica know, the game she thought she had won so easily was about to change in a way she would never forget. Stepping onto the plane felt less like entering a vessel bound for tropical relaxation and more like walking into a bad sitcom where I was forever cast as the butt of the joke, a role so familiar by now that I hardly needed a script. I moved slowly down the narrow aisle, feeling the impatient stares of fellow passengers pressing against my back like static electricity, my boarding pass crumpled in one sweaty hand, and my heart pounding louder with every step I took toward what should have been my small island of comfort, seat 17A. The window seat I had so carefully reserved weeks ago after endless back-and-forth emails confirming flight details and nagging my parents to book early. There, sprawled across 17A like she was claiming some ancestral throne, was Jessica, her manicured nails tapping rapidly against her phone screen as she snapped another set of selfies, duck lips and peace signs on full display. The very picture of entitled teenage obnoxiousness. I stopped beside her, clearing my throat, half expecting, half hoping that maybe, just maybe, she would glance up and offer a sheepish grin, slide over to the middle seat, and pretend this whole thing had just been a harmless joke at my expense, as usual. But no, Jessica looked up at me, dead in the eye, and with a smirk so wide it could have swallowed the whole damn row, said, "Oops, too slow, loser." My mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, the words scrambling up my throat only to tangle somewhere behind my teeth, leaving me standing there, boarding pass in hand, heart pounding with the kind of anger that makes your fingers tingle. I turned helplessly toward my parents, who were just now squeezing themselves into seats across the aisle, and Dad gave me a weary look, lifting one hand in that lazy, dismissive gesture I had seen 1,000 times before. "Don't make a scene, Amanda," he muttered, already pulling his cap low over his eyes like he could nap his way through another episode of family dysfunction. Jessica giggled loudly, tossing her bag into the middle seat beside her, effectively blocking me once again, and resumed her photo shoot without a care in the world. The flight attendants were already urging passengers to stow their carry-ons and sit down quickly, the cabin filling with that frantic energy of people desperate to get situated before takeoff. Swallowing every ounce of pride I had left, I shoved my bag into the overhead bin, slammed the latch shut a little harder than necessary, and slid into the nearest available seat, the dreaded middle. It was worse than sitting in traffic for 48 hours straight on the way to a town just 10 miles away, the kind of nightmare journey that warps time itself until you are convinced you have aged a decade and forgotten what real food tastes like. On my left sat a man who was hacking up a lung every few minutes, the damp sleeve of his jacket brushing against my arm every time he coughed. On my right, a toddler with wild curls and sticky hands screamed bloody murder while kicking the back of the seat in front of him with such relentless enthusiasm that I could feel the vibrations rattling my bones. Jessica, meanwhile, continued snapping selfies, laughing so hard at her own captions that a woman 2 rows up actually turned around to glare at her. I could just imagine what she was posting, something clever and cruel like peasants in economy class, with a perfectly filtered photo that showed her angled just right to look thinner, richer, better. The injustice of it all pressed down on my chest like a lead weight, each labored breath filling me with a heavier kind of resentment than I had ever thought possible. I stared out over the heads of the passengers toward the front of the plane, willing the flight attendants to hurry, praying the engine would roar to life and carry me far away from all of it, from Jessica, from Mom and Dad's indifference, from the heavy sense of invisibility that clung to me like a second skin. My seatbelt cut into my lap, and the stale recycled air of the cabin made my head swim, the low murmur of passengers blending into one long, endless buzz of disappointment. Somewhere over the intercom, the captain's voice droned about clear skies and a smooth flight ahead, but all I could hear was the blood rushing in my ears and the distant, infuriating sound of Jessica's laughter. I squeezed my eyes shut, breathing slowly through my nose, counting backwards from 100, wondering if I would survive the next 4 hours without snapping and giving Jessica the slap across the face she had deserved since she was about 12 years old. Just when I thought I might actually start crying from the sheer unfairness of it all, a soft hand tapped me on the shoulder, startling me so much I nearly jumped out of my seat. I turned and found a flight attendant standing beside me, her face calm and polite, but with a glint of urgency in her eyes. She leaned down, her voice low enough that I had to lean in to hear her over the crying and coughing surrounding me. "Miss, would you mind coming with me for a moment?" she whispered. The people around us barely noticed, too busy wrestling with their luggage or scolding their restless children, but I felt every eye on me, imagined every whisper and judgment as I unbuckled my seatbelt and stood, feeling my knees wobble with nerves and confusion. My first stupid, panicked thought was that I was in trouble somehow, that maybe Jessica had complained about me and the crew was siding with her, because why would this day be any different? I caught a glimpse of Jessica over my shoulder as I followed the flight attendant back up the aisle, her brows furrowed in mild curiosity but no real concern, because in Jessica's world, nothing bad ever happened to her, only to the people she stepped on along the way. I gripped the strap of my bag tighter, heart thudding painfully against my ribs, as the flight attendant led me toward the front of the plane, past the business class curtain. Past the judging eyes of passengers who had paid triple my ticket price for their extra legroom and dignity. I had no idea what was happening, but one thing was for sure, something was finally about to change. The flight attendant walked ahead with the kind of calm authority that made me instinctively trust her, even though my stomach was twisting itself into knots tighter than the cords on the battered duffel bag I clutched in both hands. As I stumbled along behind her, still half convinced that some terrible mistake was about to be revealed and I would be marched back to my nightmare of a middle seat, I noticed how we bypassed the cluttered, cramped rows of economy entirely, heading straight for the sleek curtain that separated the real travelers from the rest of us. My heart jackhammered inside my chest, my mind racing through every possible scenario that could explain this sudden detour, none of them reasonable or remotely comforting. We reached the front of the plane where the air smelled different somehow, fresher and cleaner, less like desperation and microwave lasagna, and more like polished leather and something faintly citrusy. The flight attendant stopped, turned toward me with a professional but genuine smile, and gently took the crumpled boarding pass from my sweaty fingers. She glanced down, checked it against something on her tablet, and then, to my utter disbelief, nodded approvingly and gestured toward an open seat by the window, a real seat. The kind you see in magazines or in the travel commercials where people stretch out luxuriously while sipping champagne. "Miss, you've been upgraded," she said with that same reassuring smile, her voice soft enough that only I could hear it, and for a second I just stood there blinking at her, the words bouncing around inside my brain like ping-pong balls with nowhere to land. "Please, make yourself comfortable. We'll have a drink service starting shortly." I nodded mutely, dragging my feet toward the seat like I expected someone to jump out from behind a curtain and yell that it was all some cruel prank set up by Jessica. Lowering myself into the wide, welcoming embrace of the seat, I ran my fingers over the buttery leather armrest, hardly able to believe what was happening. My bag found a home in a spacious compartment that could have easily fit two of the carry-ons back in coach, and as I fumbled with the seat controls, trying not to look too much like a country bumpkin who had stumbled into a palace, a flight attendant materialized beside me holding a tray with a flute of pale golden champagne and a small dish of warm, perfectly salted mixed nuts. I accepted both with a polite murmur of thanks, my voice cracking slightly from the sheer absurdity of the situation. Settling back against the plush headrest, I dared to peek back through the narrow crack between the first-class curtain and the rest of the plane, my eyes searching out Jessica and my parents. It was not hard to find them. Jessica's head was craned so far around that she looked like an owl, her eyes wide and confused, her mouth slightly open in disbelief. Dad was leaning over the aisle, trying to get a better look, while Mom's brows were knit together in a way that usually preceded an interrogation or at least an aggressively passive-aggressive comment. I could practically hear Jessica's thoughts from where I sat, see the way her mind whirred and churned trying to make sense of how the family scapegoat, the background character, the perpetual second best, had somehow been whisked into first class like a princess in a fairy tale. For the first time in a long, long time, I felt something shift inside me, not just anger, not just hurt, but a sweet, slow-burning sense of satisfaction that tasted better than the champagne fizzing gently on my tongue. Leaning my head back against the seat, I closed my eyes for a moment and let the memory bubble up, a scene from 2 months ago when I had been hunched over my laptop late at night, booking our flight after Mom had dumped the task on me with her usual offhandness. I had been half asleep, annoyed, and careless, and when the screen had asked if I wanted to apply my frequent flyer points to the reservation, I had clicked yes without really thinking it through. It was only later, when the confirmation email had come through showing my seat assignment in bold letters, 17A, that I realized I had been upgraded, but by then nobody cared enough to read the details I sent them. Jessica had skimmed the itinerary, pronounced it boring, and Mom had just said, as long as we're all on the same flight, who cares? They had not cared then, not enough to notice, and now the universe, or maybe just the brutal irony of life, had decided to let them choke on their own negligence. I opened my eyes again, staring out the window as the plane taxied slowly toward the runway, the California sun glinting off the silver wing just outside. The engines rumbled to life beneath us, a deep, vibrating growl that felt almost like a drumbeat in my chest, steady and inevitable. The urge to twist the knife a little deeper rose up strong and wicked inside me, and I slid my phone out of my pocket, the smooth case cool against my fingertips. I opened the camera app, framing a shot of my champagne glass resting elegantly on the polished tray table, the soft focus luxury of first class practically screaming in the background. My thumb hovered over the shutter button, my mind already drafting the perfect caption, something sharp enough to sting but light enough to be dismissed as just a joke if confronted. For a long moment I wavered, caught between the delicious temptation of immediate, petty revenge and the deeper, more satisfying idea of letting Jessica stew in her own confusion without giving her the satisfaction of a direct answer. I could almost hear her shrill demands already. Why does Amanda get everything? Why is she so lucky? And the thought made me smile wider than any photo could capture. In the end, I slipped the phone back into my pocket without taking the picture, deciding that sometimes the best victories were the ones you did not announce, but savored quietly, alone, like a secret dessert stolen in the middle of the night. As the plane lifted into the sky, leaving the city and all its petty dramas far below, I leaned back in my seat, closed my eyes, and allowed myself to imagine what it would feel like if, just this once, the universe kept tipping in my favor. Sitting there in the plush comfort of first class, I could feel the cold, exhilarating rush of opportunity tickling the edges of my mind, whispering to me that this was my moment to turn the tables in a way that Jessica would never see coming. The longer I sat there, the more the old anger inside me cooled, sharpening into something harder, something cleaner, something far more dangerous than a hot-headed tantrum could ever be. I was not going to stoop to her level by throwing a fit or screaming down the aisle. No, that was Jessica's playbook, and frankly, it always made her look like a spoiled brat everyone barely tolerated. I was going to play it cooler than a January wind off Lake Michigan, and I was going to enjoy every damn second of it. Picking up my phone again, I carefully angled the camera to capture the scene without showing too much, just enough of the white tablecloth, the gleaming silverware, the artfully plated meal that looked more like something from a Michelin-starred restaurant than anything I had ever eaten at 30,000 feet. The champagne flute sat just at the edge of the frame, the golden bubbles catching the light perfectly, while the tender cut of filet mignon and tiny, delicate vegetables created a portrait of pure, smug victory. I tapped out a caption with fingers steady as stone, pausing only for a second before pressing post. Thanks, seat thieves. Hope the peanuts back there aren't too stale. Within moments, my phone buzzed with the first notification. Jessica had seen it. I could almost hear her screech from across the curtain, almost feel the waves of indignation rolling off her like heat off an asphalt road in the middle of July. I did not bother checking what she was texting because I already knew the tone, a mixture of disbelief, fury, and the kind of entitlement that only a lifetime of being babed could produce. The little vibration alert kept going off. Another text, another call, another futile attempt to regain control of a situation she had created, but clearly had not thought through. I leaned back in my seat, sipped from my second glass of champagne, and allowed myself the rare luxury of savoring every second of her unraveling. Across the thin divide of that curtain, Jessica was probably throwing a tantrum, stomping her feet, demanding answers from my parents, who, judging from the stony silence that had descended after the first wave of messages, were now realizing that maybe, just maybe, their golden child had overplayed her hand. I imagined Mom's tight, forced smile as she whispered something about not making a scene while Dad stared blankly ahead, pretending he was anywhere but trapped beside his two bickering daughters. Then, as if the universe itself decided to throw in a little bonus gift just for me, the plane hit a pocket of turbulence so rough that my champagne sloshed dangerously close to the rim of my glass. The seatbelt signs dinged overhead, and the pilot's calm voice instructed everyone to buckle up, but I was already strapped in, cozy and secure in my wide, blessedly private seat. I barely jostled in my seat, only having to steady my plate slightly with a casual hand. In economy, however, the turbulence hit like a small earthquake. From my vantage point between the curtain gap, I caught a perfect, crystal-clear view of Jessica shrieking as her diet soda exploded from its flimsy cup, drenching her expensive white sweater in a wave of sticky brown liquid. She jumped up, frantically patting at herself with cocktail napkins, while my mother dug through her oversized purse for wet wipes that would be completely useless against the sheer volume of damage. My father, bless his useless soul, merely handed Jessica a stack of cheap napkins from the beverage cart and muttered something inaudible, likely a tired suggestion to calm down that would do absolutely nothing to stem the flood of her indignation. For a moment, I felt a pang of something, pity, maybe, or guilt, bubble up in my chest, but it was fleeting and small, disappearing under the crushing, undeniable satisfaction of finally seeing her stumble without anyone rushing in to fix it for her. I lifted my glass slightly in a silent toast, took another long, luxurious sip, and turned my gaze back out the window, letting the endless stretch of blue sky fill my vision and wash away whatever tiny remnants of remorse I might have felt. The rest of the flight passed in a surreal haze of comfort and quiet, the kind of peace I had almost forgotten existed, where no one interrupted my thoughts or demanded my attention or made me feel small just for existing. Every so often I would glance toward the curtain, where I could hear faint snippets of Jessica's ongoing meltdown, her voice climbing higher and higher into the familiar register of wounded privilege, but I made no move to intervene. No move to answer the desperate pings on my phone. Let her squirm. Let her stew. For once, she was on her own. As the captain announced our final descent and the flight attendants bustled about preparing the cabin, I gathered my things slowly and deliberately, savoring every detail of this perfect reversal. The leather of my seat creaked slightly as I shifted, the seatbelt clicking free with a soft, satisfying snap. I slipped my phone into my pocket, feeling the comforting weight of it against my thigh, knowing that the real fun had not even started yet. Because once we landed, once the wheels hit the tarmac and we were all forced back into the same miserable dance of pretend civility, I planned to make sure Jessica and my parents understood just how deep the consequences of their casual cruelty could cut. Revenge, after all, was not just a dish best served cold, it was a multi-course meal, and I had barely finished the appetizer. As soon as the wheels thudded against the tarmac with a bone-deep shudder that vibrated through the entire plane, the usual restless energy filled the cabin, passengers immediately fumbling with seatbelts, overhead compartments, and cell phones even though the flight attendants cheerfully reminded everyone to stay seated. I, however, remained still, sinking deeper into the plush first-class seat, savoring the rare sensation of not having to scramble like a rat in a race, knowing that, for once, I would be among the first to step off this flying zoo and walk into the fresh, open air like a queen returning from conquest. The first-class section was already preparing to disembark, the attendant moving gracefully down the aisle with a rehearsed smile and a practiced efficiency that told me she had done this dance 1,000 times before. I rose slowly, taking my time gathering my things, because I knew that not far behind the thin gray curtain, Jessica would be seething in her cramped seat, watching every move I made, hating every second she had to wait while I, the afterthought of the family, was treated like royalty. When it was finally my turn, I moved down the jet bridge with slow, deliberate steps, feeling the weight of 100 eyes on my back, some curious, some indifferent, and a few, just a few, burning with the kind of petty envy that felt like a warm, invisible cloak wrapped tightly around my shoulders. As I entered the terminal, the rush of cool, conditioned air hit my face, and I realized with a small jolt that I was smiling, not just on the outside, but deep in my bones, a real smile that made my chest ache with the unfamiliar stretch of it. I walked ahead, pulling my modest carry-on behind me, not bothering to look back even though I could hear the messy clatter of economy passengers flooding out behind me like a broken dam. I paused near the entrance to the baggage claim area, pretending to check my phone while really just waiting for the inevitable moment when my family would catch up. And sure enough, within minutes, I heard Jessica's sharp, familiar voice, pitched low but unmistakably furious, hissing at our mother, "Why does she always get lucky? It's not fair." I turned slightly, just enough to catch a glimpse of them without making it obvious. Jessica's face was twisted into a mask of frustration, her once pristine white sweater now stained a dingy brown from the spilled soda, her hair frizzy with airplane static and her arms crossed tightly across her chest like a sulky child. Mom was murmuring something soothing but strained, the way you do when you know you are supposed to defend your kid, but you also know, deep down, they deserve every miserable second they are experiencing. Dad, as usual, looked like he wished he could teleport far away from the whole ugly scene. I let them pass me without a word, slipping into the background the way I had learned to do so well over the years, but this time it was different. This time I was not fading because I had been forgotten. I was choosing to remain unseen. And the power of that choice tasted better than anything they could have offered me. At the baggage carousel, while Mom and Dad bickered half-heartedly over which belt our luggage would come out on, I pulled out my phone and opened the rideshare app. Within minutes, I had arranged a sleek black town car to pick me up, the kind you see politicians and CEOs stepping out of with polished shoes and briefcases that probably cost more than my rent. When the driver texted that he had arrived at the designated pickup spot, I casually wheeled my bag past my family without so much as a nod, ignoring the confused glances Jessica threw my way as she jabbed at the cracked screen of her phone, probably trying to figure out why their scheduled shuttle was running late. I stepped into the waiting car, the cool leather interior smelling faintly of mint and cedar, and as the door closed with a satisfying thunk behind me, I allowed myself one last look through the tinted window. There they stood, Jessica hopping from foot to foot in irritation, Mom squinting at the shuttle schedule posted on the dirty glass wall, and Dad scrolling mindlessly through his emails like he could will himself into another universe if he just focused hard enough. None of them looked at me. None of them even realized I was gone. As the driver pulled smoothly away from the curb, merging into the river of traffic that wrapped around the terminal like a lazy snake, I leaned back against the seat and let out a long breath I had not realized I had been holding. A small, sharp pang twisted in my chest, not regret exactly, but something close to it, something heavy and a little sad, like standing on the edge of a cliff and knowing that even if you survived the fall, the view would never be the same again. Was it worth it, I wondered, watching the terminal shrink in the distance, watching the figures of my family grow smaller and smaller until they were just blurs swallowed by the crowd? Had proving my point, finally taking something for myself, been worth the cold, hollow ache that settled into my bones even as the satisfaction of my victory burned bright and hot in my belly? I turned my gaze out the window, watching the endless sprawl of the city whip past in a blur of color and movement, and I thought about how sometimes winning feels lonelier than losing. How sometimes getting exactly what you want leaves you standing alone in a room full of trophies you can no longer bear to look at. Maybe the truth was that some scars never heal. Not really, not even when you have all the evidence in the world that you were right all along. I never texted them that night, never called, never reached out to explain or gloat or patch things up. Maybe I could have, maybe it would have made a difference, maybe it would not have changed a damn thing. I do not know. I still do not know. What I do know is this. Sometimes you walk away, and sometimes you get left behind, and sometimes, if you are very unlucky or very lucky, it gets hard to tell the difference. You realize you have done both at the exact same time.